Section 1 of A General History of the Pirates. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A General History of the Pirates by Charles Johnson. Introduction. As the pirates in the West Indies have been so formidable and numerous that they have interrupted the trade of Europe into those parts, and our English merchants in particular have suffered more by their depredations than by the united force of France and Spain in the late war, we do not doubt but the world will be curious to know the origin and progress of these desperadoes, who were the terror of the trading part of the world. But before we enter upon their particular history, it will not be amiss, by way of introduction, to show by some examples drawn from history the great mischief and danger which threaten kingdoms and commonwealths from the increase of these sort of robbers, when either by the troubles of particular times or the neglect of governments they are not crushed before they gather strength. It has been the case heretofore that when a single pirate has been suffered to range the seas as not being worth the notice of a government, he has by degrees grown so powerful as to put them to the expense of a great deal of blood and treasure before he was suppressed. We shall not examine how it came to pass that our pirates in the West Indies have continually increased till of late. This is an inquiry which belongs to the legislature or representatives of the people in Parliament, and to them we shall leave it. Our business shall be briefly to show what, from beginnings as inconsiderable as these, other nations have suffered. In the times of Marius and Sylla, Rome was in her greatest strength, yet she was so torn in pieces by the factions of those two great men that everything which concerned the public good was altogether neglected. When certain pirates broke out from Sicilia, a country of Asia Minor, situate on the coast of the Mediterranean betwixt Syria on the east, from whence it is divided by Mount Taurus, and Armenia Minor on the west, this beginning was mean and inconsiderable, having but 2 or 3 ships and a few men, with which they cruised about the Greek islands, taking such ships as were very ill armed or weakly defended. However, by the taking of many prizes they soon increased in wealth and power. The first action of theirs which made a noise was the taking of Julius Caesar, who was as yet a youth, and who, being obliged to fly from the cruelties of Sylla, who sought his life, went into Bithynia, and sojourned a while with Nicomedes, king of that country. In his return back by sea he was met with and taken by some of these pirates near the island of Pharmacusa. These pirates had a barbarous custom of tying their prisoners back to back and throwing them into the sea, but supposing Caesar to be some person of a high rank because of his purple robes and the number of his attendants, they thought it would be more for their profit to preserve him, in hopes of receiving a great sum for his ransom. Therefore they told him he should have his liberty, provided he would pay them 20 talents, which they judged to be a very high demand, in our money about £3,600 sterling. He smiled, and of his own accord promised them 50 talents. They were both pleased and surprised at his answer, and consented that several of his attendants should go by his direction and raise the money, and he was left among these ruffians with no more than 3 attendants. He passed 38 days, and seemed so little concerned or afraid, that often when he went to sleep he used to charge them not to make a noise, threatening if they disturbed him to hang them all. He also played at dice with them, and sometimes wrote verses and dialogues which he used to repeat, and also caused them to repeat, and if they did not praise and admire them, he would call them beasts and barbarians, telling them he would crucify them. They took all these as the sallies of a juvenile humour, and were rather diverted than displeased at them. At length his attendants returned with his ransom, which he paid, and was discharged. He sailed for the port of Miletum, where, as soon as he was arrived, he used all his art and industry in fitting out a squadron of ships, which he equipped and armed at his own charges, and sailing in quest of the pirates, he surprised them as they lay at anchor among the islands, and took those who had taken him before with some others. The money he found upon them he made prize of, to reimburse his charges, and he carried the men to Pergamus or Troy, and there secured them in prison. In the meantime he applied himself to Junius, then governor of Asia, to whom it belonged to judge and determine of the punishment of these men. But Junius, finding there was no money to be had, answered Caesar that he would think at his leisure what was to be done with those prisoners. Caesar took his leave of him and returned back to Pergamus, and commanded that the prisoners should be brought out and executed according to law in that case provided, which is taken notice of in a chapter at the end of this book, concerning the laws in cases of piracy. and thus he gave them that punishment in earnest which he had often threatened them with in jest. Caesar went straight to Rome, where, being engaged in the designs of his own private ambition, as were almost all the leading men in Rome, the pirates who were left had time to increase to a prodigious strength, for while the civil wars lasted the seas were left unguarded, so that, Plutarch tells us, they erected diverse arsenals full of all manner of warlike stores, made commodious harbours, set up watchtowers and beacons all along the coasts of Sicilia, that they had a mighty fleet, well equipped and furnished with galleots of oars, manned not only with men of desperate courage, but also with expert pilots and mariners. They had their ships of force and light pinnaces for cruising and making discoveries, in all no less than 1,000 sail, so gloriously set out that they were as much to be envied for their gallant show as feared for their force, having the stern and quarters all gilded with gold, and their oars plated with silver, as well as purple sails, as if their greatest delight had been to glory in their iniquity. Nor were they content with committing piracies and insolencies by sea. They committed as great depredations by land, or rather made conquests, for they took and sacked no less than 400 cities, laid several others under contributions, plundered the temples of the gods, and enriched themselves with the offerings deposited in them. They often landed bodies of men, who not only plundered the villages along the sea-coast, but ransacked the fine houses of the noblemen along the Tiber. A body of them once took Sextilius and Belinus, 2 Roman praetors, in their purple robes, going from Rome to their governments, and carried them away with all their sergeants, officers, and vergers. They also took the daughter of Antonius, a consular person, and one who had obtained the honour of a triumph, as she was going to the country house of her father. But what was most barbarous was a custom they had, when they took any ship, of inquiring of the person on board concerning their names and country. If any of them said he was a Roman, they fell down upon their knees, as if in affright at the greatness of that name, and begged pardon for what they had done, and imploring his mercy, they used to perform the offices of servants about his person, and when they found they had deceived him into a belief of their being sincere, they hung out the ladder of the ship, and coming with a show of courtesy, told him he had his liberty, desiring him to walk out of the ship, and this in the middle of the sea, and when they observed him in surprise, as was natural, they used to throw him overboard with mighty shouts of laughter, so wanton were they in their cruelty. Thus, while Rome was mistress of the world, she suffered insults and affronts, almost at her gates, from these powerful robbers. But what for a time made factions cease, and roused the genius of that people never used to suffer wrongs from a fair enemy, was an excessive scarcity of provisions in Rome, occasioned by all the ships loaden with corn and provisions from Sicily, Corsica, and other places being intercepted and taken by these pirates, insomuch that they were almost reduced to a famine. Upon this, Pompey the Great was immediately appointed general to manage this war. 500 ships were immediately fitted out. He had 14 senators, men of experience in the war, for his vice-admirals, and so considerable an enemy were these ruffians become, that no less than an army of 100,000 foot and 5,000 horse was appointed to invade them by land. But it happened very luckily for Rome that Pompey sailed out before the pirate had intelligence of a design against them, so that their ships were scattered all over the Mediterranean, like bees gone out from a hive, some one way, some another, to bring home their lading. Pompey divided his fleet into 13 squadrons, to whom he appointed their several stations, so that great numbers of the pirates fell into their hands, ship by ship, without any loss. 40 days he passed in scouring the Mediterranean, some of the fleet cruising along the coast of Africa, some about the islands, and some upon the Italian coasts, so that often those pirates who were flying from one squadron fell in with another. However, some of them escaped, and these making directly to Sicilia, and acquainting their confederates on shore with what had happened, they appointed a rendezvous of all the ships that had escaped at the port of Coracesium in the same country. Pompey, finding the Mediterranean quite clear, appointed a meeting of all his fleet at the haven of Brundusium, and from thence, sailing round into the Adriatic, he went directly to attack these pirates in their hives. As soon as he came near the Coracesium in Sicilia, where the remainder of the pirates now lay, they had the hardiness to come and give him battle, but the genius of old Rome prevailed, and the pirates received an entire overthrow, being all either taken or destroyed. But as they made many strong fortresses upon the sea coast, and built castles and strongholds up the country about the foot of Mount Taurus, he was obliged to besiege them with his army. Some places he took by storm, others surrendered to his mercy, to whom he gave their lives, and at length he made an entire conquest. But it is probable that these pirates received sufficient notice of the Roman preparation against them, so as they might have had time to draw their scattered strength into a body, to have met Pompey by sea. The advantage appeared greatly on their side, in numbers of shipping and of men, nor did they want courage, as may be seen by their coming out of the port of Coracisium to give the Romans battle, with a force much inferior to theirs. I say, had they overthrown Pompey, it is likely that they would have made greater attempts, and Rome, which had conquered the whole world, might have been subdued by a parcel of pirates. This is a proof how dangerous it is to governments to be negligent and not take an early care in suppressing these sea banditti before they gather strength. The truth of this maxim may be better exemplified in the history of Barbaroux, a native in the city of Mytilene, in the island of Lesbos in the Aegean Sea, a fellow of ordinary birth, who, being bred to the sea, first set out from thence upon the pirating account, with only one small vessel. But by the prizes he took he gained immense riches, so that, getting a great number of large ships, all the bold and dissolute fellows of those islands flocked to him, and listed in his service, for the hopes of booty, so that his strength was increased to a formidable fleet. With all these he performed such bold and adventurous actions that he became the terror of the seas. About this time it happened that Selim Utemi, king of Algiers, having refused to pay the accustomed tribute to the Spaniards, was apprehensive of an invasion from thence, wherefore he treated with Barbaroux upon the foot of an ally, to come and assist him, and deliver him from paying this tribute. Barbaroux readily came into it, and sailing to Algiers with a great fleet, he put part of his men on shore, and having laid a plot to surprise the city, he effected it with great success, and murdered Selim in a bath, soon after which he was himself crowned king of Algiers. After this he made war upon Abdelabdeh, king of Tunis, and overthrew him in battle. He extended his conquests on all sides, and thus from a thief became a mighty king, and though he was at last killed in battle, yet he had so well established himself upon that throne, that dying without issue, he left the inheritance of the kingdom to his brother, another pirate. I come now to speak of the pirates infesting the West Indies, where they are more numerous than in any other parts of the world, on several reasons. First, because there are so many uninhabited little islands and keys, with harbors convenient and secure for cleaning their vessels, and abounding with what they often want, provision, water, seafowl, turtle, shell, and other fish, where if they carry in but strong liquor, they indulge a time, and become ready for new expeditions before any intelligence can reach to hurt them. It may here perhaps be no unnecessary digression to explain upon what they call keys in the West Indies. These are small sandy islands, appearing a little above the surf of the water, with only a few bushes or weeds upon them, but abound, those most any distance from the main, with turtle, amphibious animals, that always choose the quietest and most unfrequented place for laying their eggs, which are to a vast number in the seasons, and would seldom be seen but for this, except by pirates. Then vessels from Jamaica and the other governments make voyages, called turtling, for supplying the people a common and approved food with them. I am apt to think these keys, especially those nigh islands, to have been once contiguous with them, and separated by earthquakes, frequently there, or inundations, because some of them that have been within continual view, as those nigh Jamaica, are observed within our time to be entirely wasted away and lost, and others daily wasting. There are not only of the use above taken notice of to pirates, but it is commonly believed there were always, in buccaneering piratical times, the hiding places for their riches, and oftentimes a shelter for themselves, till their friends on the main had found means to obtain indemnity for their crimes. For you must understand, when acts of grace were more frequent, and the laws less severe, these men continually found favours and encouragers at Jamaica. And perhaps they're not all dead yet. I have been told many of them still living have been of the same trade, and left it off only because they can live as well honestly, and gain now at the hazard of others' necks. Second, another reason why these seas are chose by pirates is the great commerce thither by French, Spaniards, Dutch, and especially English ships. They are sure in the latitude of these trading islands to meet with prizes, booties of provision, clothing, and naval stores, and sometimes money, there being great sums remitted this way to England. The returns of the afiento and private slave trade to the Spanish West Indies, and in short by some one or other all the riches of Potosi. A third reason is the inconveniency and difficulty of being pursued by the men of war. The many small inlets, lagoons, and harbors on these solitary islands and keys is a natural security. 'Tis generally here that the pirates begin their enterprises, setting out at first with a very small force, and by infesting these seas and those of the continent of North America, in a year's time, if they have good luck on their sides, they accumulate such strength as enables them to make foreign expeditions. The first is usually to Guinea, taking the Azores and Cape de Verde Islands in their way, and then to Brazil and the East Indies, where, if they meet with prosperous voyages, they set down at Madagascar or the neighboring islands, and enjoy their ill-gotten wealth among their elder brethren with impunity. But, that I may not give too much encouragement to the profession, I must inform my maritime readers that the far greater part of these rovers are cut short in the pursuit by a sudden precipitation into the other world. The rise of these rovers since the Peace of Utrecht, or at least the great increase of them, may justly be computed to the Spanish settlements in the West Indies, the governors of which being often some hungry courtiers, sent thither to repair or make a fortune, generally countenance all proceedings that bring in profit. They grant commissions to great numbers of vessels of war, on pretence of preventing an interloping trade, with orders to seize all ships or vessels whatsoever within 5 leagues of their coasts, which our English ships cannot well avoid coming in their voyage to Jamaica. But if the Spanish captains chance to exceed this commission, and rob and plunder at discretion, the sufferers are allowed to complain and exhibit a process in their court, and after great expense of suit, delay of time, and other inconveniencies, obtain a decree in their favour. But when the ship and cargo comes to be claimed with costs of suit, they find to their sorrow that it has been previously condemned, and the plunder divided among the crew. The commander that made the capture, who alone is responsible, is found to be a poor rascally fellow, not worth a groat, and no doubt is placed in that station for the like purposes. The frequent losses sustained by our merchants abroad by these pirates was provocation enough to attempt something by way of reprisal, and a fair opportunity offering itself in the year 1716, the traders of the West Indies took care not to slip it over, but made the best use of it their circumstances would permit. It was about 2 years before that the Spanish galleons or plate fleet had been cast away in the Gulf of Florida, and several vessels from the Havana were at work with diving engines to fish up the silver that was on board the galleons. The Spaniards had recovered some millions of pieces of eight, and had carried it all to the Havana, but they had at present about 350,000 pieces of eight in silver, then upon the spot, and were daily taking up more. In the meantime 2 ships and 3 sloops fitted out from Jamaica, Barbados, etc., under Captain Henry Jennings, sailed to the Gulf and found the Spaniards there upon the wreck. The money before spoken of was left on shore and deposited in a storehouse under the government of 2 commissaries and a guard of about 60 soldiers. The rovers came directly upon the place, bringing their little fleet to an anchor, and in a word, landing 300 men, they attacked the guard, who immediately ran away, and thus they seized the treasure, which they carried off, making the best of their way to Jamaica. In their way they unhappily met with a Spanish ship, bound from Portobello to the Havana with a great many rich goods, viz. bales of cochineal, casks of indigo, and 60,000 pieces of eight more, which, their hands being in, they took, and having rifled the vessel, let her go. They went away to Jamaica with their booty, and were followed in view of the port by the Spaniards, who, having seen them thither, went back to the governor of the Havana with the account of it, who immediately sent a vessel to the governor of Jamaica to complain of this robbery and to reclaim the goods. As it was in full peace, and contrary to all justice and right that this fact was committed, they were soon made sensible that the government at Jamaica would not suffer them to go unpunished, much less protect them. Therefore they saw a necessity of shifting for themselves. So to make bad worse, they went to sea again, though not without disposing of their cargo to good advantage and furnishing themselves with ammunition, provisions, etc., and thus being made desperate, they turned pirates, robbing not the Spaniards only, but their own countrymen and any nation they could lay their hands on. It happened about this time that the Spaniards, with 3 or 4 small men of war, fell upon our logwood cutters in the Bay of Campeche and Bay of Honduras, and after they had made prizes of the following ships and vessels, they gave the men belonging to them 3 sloops to carry them home. But these men being made desperate by their misfortunes, and meeting with the pirates, they took on with them, and so increased their number. The list of ships and vessels taken by the Spanish men of war in the year 1716. The Stafford, Captain Knox, from New England, bound for London. The Anne, Gurnish, for ditto. The Dove, Grimstone, for New England. A sloop, Alden, for ditto. A brigantine, Mosson, for ditto. A brigantine, Turfield, for ditto. A brigantine, Tennis, for ditto. A ship, Porter, for ditto. Indian Emperor, Wentworth, for New England. A ship, Rich, master. Ditto, Bay, ditto, Smith, ditto, Stockham, ditto, Statley. A sloop, Richards, belonging to New England. 2 sloops belonging to Jamaica. 1 sloop of Barbados. 2 ships from Scotland. 2 ships from Holland. The rovers being now pretty strong, they consulted together about getting some place of retreat where they might lodge their wealth, clean and repair their ships, and make themselves a kind of abode. They were not long in resolving, but fixed upon the island of Providence, the most considerable of the Bahama Islands, lying in the latitude of about 24 degrees north, and to the eastward of the Spanish Florida. This island is about 28 miles long, and 11 were broadest, and has a harbour big enough to hold 500 sail of ships, before which lies a small island which makes 2 inlets to the harbour. At either way there is a bar, over which no ship of 500 ton can pass. The Bahama Islands were possessed by the English till the year 1700, when the French and Spaniards from Petit Guavas invaded them, took the fort and governor in the island of Providence, plundered and destroyed the settlements, etc., carried off half the blacks, and the rest of the people, who fled to the woods, retired afterwards to Carolina. In March 1705 and 6 the House of Lords did, in an address to her late Majesty, set forth, that the French and Spaniards had twice during the time of the war overrun and plundered the Bahama Islands, that there was no form of government there, that the harbour of the Isle of Providence might be easily put in a posture of defence, and that it would be of dangerous consequence should these islands fall into the hands of the enemy. Wherefore the Lords humbly besought her Majesty to use such methods as she should think proper for taking the said island into her hands, in order to secure the same to the crown of this kingdom, and to the security and advantage of the trade thereof. But, however it happened, no means were used in compliance to that address for securing the Bahama Islands, till the English pirates had made Providence their retreat and general receptacle. Then 'twas found absolutely necessary, in order to dislodge that troublesome colony, and information being made by the merchants to the government of the mischief they did and were likely to do, His Majesty was pleased to grant the following order. Whitehall, September 15th, 1716. Complaint having been made to His Majesty by great number of merchants, masters of ships, and others, as well as by several governors of His Majesty's islands and plantations in the West Indies, that the pirates are grown so numerous that they infest not only the seas near Jamaica, but even those of the northern continent of America, and that, unless some effectual means be used, the whole trade from Great Britain to those parts will not only be obstructed, but in imminent danger of being lost. His Majesty has, upon mature deliberation in council, been pleased in the first place to order a proper force to be employed for the suppressing the said pirates, which force so to be employed is as follows: a list of His Majesty's ships and vessels employed and to be employed at the British governments and plantations in the West Indies. Jamaica. Rates 5. Adventure, 40 guns, now there. Diamond, 40 guns, sailed from hence thither 5th of last month. Ludlow Castle, 40 guns, to carry the governor. Swift sloop, now there. Rates 6. Winchelsea, 20 guns, surveying the coast of the West Indies, and then to return home, but during her being at Jamaica is to join the others for security of the trade and intercepting pirates. Barbados. Rates 5. Scarborough, 30 guns, now there. Leeward Islands. Rates 6. Seaford, now there. Trial sloop, 6 guns. Virginia. Rate 6. Lyme, 20 guns, now there. Rate 5. Shoreham, 30 guns, ordered home. Pearl, 40 guns, sailed thither from home the 7th of last month, and is to cruise about the Capes. New York. Rate 6. Phoenix, 30 guns, now there. New England. Squirrel, 20 guns. Rose, 20 guns, ordered home. Those at Jamaica, Barbados, and the Leeward Islands are to join upon occasion for annoying the pirates and the security of the trade, and those at New England, Virginia, and New York are to do the like." Besides these frigates, 2 men of war were ordered to attend Captain Rogers, late commander of the 2 Bristol ships called the Duke and Duchess, that took the rich Acapulco ship and made a tour round the globe. This gentleman received a commission from His Majesty to be governor of the island of Providence, and was vested with power to make use of all possible methods for reducing the pirates, and that nothing might be wanting, he carried with him the king's proclamation of pardon to those who should return to their duty by a certain time. The proclamation is as follows: By the king, "A proclamation for suppressing pirates." George Rex. Whereas we have received information that several persons, subjects of Great Britain, have since the 24th day of June in the year of our Lord 1715, committed divers piracies and robberies upon the high seas in the West Indies, or adjoining to our plantations, which hath and may occasion great damage to the merchants of Great Britain and others trading into those parts, and though we have appointed such a force as we judge sufficient for suppressing the said pirates, yet the more effectually to put an end to the same we have thought fit, by and with the advice of our Privy Council, to issue this our royal proclamation, and we do hereby promise and declare that in case any of the said pirates shall on or before the 5th of September, in the year of our Lord 1718, surrender him or themselves to one of our principal Secretaries of State in Great Britain or Ireland, or to any governor or deputy governor of any of our plantations beyond the seas, every such pirate and pirates so surrendering him or themselves as aforesaid shall have our gracious pardon of and for such his or their piracy or piracies by him or them committed before the 5th of January next ensuing. And we do hereby strictly charge and command all our admirals, captains, and other officers at sea, and all our governors and commanders of any forts, castles, or other places in our plantations, and all other our officers, civil and military, to seize and take such of the pirates who shall refuse or neglect to surrender themselves accordingly. And we do hereby further declare that in case any person or persons on or after the 6th day of September 1718 shall discover or seize or cause or procure to be discovered or seized any one or more of the said pirates, so refusing or neglecting to surrender themselves as aforesaid, so as they may be brought to justice and convicted of the said offence, such person or persons so making such discovery or seizure, or causing or procuring such discovery or seizure to be made, shall have and receive as a reward for the same, videlicet for every commander of any private ship or vessel, the sum of £100 for every lieutenant, master, boatswain, carpenter, and gunner, the sum of £40 for every inferior officer, the sum of £30, and for every private man, the sum of £20. And if any person or persons belonging to and being part of the crew of any such pirate ship or vessel shall on or after the said 6th day of September 1718 seize and deliver, or cause to be seized or delivered, any commander or commanders of such pirate ship or vessel, so as that he or they be brought to justice and convicted of the said offence, such person or persons, as a reward for the same, shall receive for every such commander the sum of £200, which said sums the Lord Treasurer or the Commissioners of our Treasury for the time being are hereby required and desired to pay accordingly. Given at our court at Hampton Court, the 5th day of September 1717, in the 4th year of our reign. God save the King. Before Governor Rogers went over, the proclamation was sent to them, which they took as Teague took the Covenant, that is, they made prize of the ship and proclamation too, However, they sent for those who were out a cruising, and called a general council, but there was so much noise and glamour that nothing could be agreed upon. Some were for fortifying the island to stand upon their own terms, and treating with the government upon the foot of a commonwealth. Others were also for strengthening the island for their own security, but were not strenuous for those punctilios, so that they might have a general pardon without being obliged to make any restitution, and to retire with all their effects to the neighbouring British plantations. But Captain Jennings, who was their commodore, and who always bore a great sway among them, being a man of good understanding and good estate, before this whim took him of going a pirating, resolved upon surrendering, without more ado, to the terms of the proclamation, which so disconcerted all their measures that the Congress broke up very abruptly without doing anything, and presently Jennings, and by his example about 150 more, came in to the governor of Bermudas, and had their certificates, though the greatest part of them returned again like the dog to the vomit. The commanders who were then in the island, besides Captain Jennings above mentioned, I think were these: Benjamin Hornigold, Edward Teach, John Martel, James Fife, Christopher Winter, Nicholas Brown, Paul Williams, Charles Bellamy, Oliver Labouche, Major Penner, Ed England, T. Burgess, Thomas Coughlin, R. Sample, Charles Vane, and 2 or 3 others. Hornigold, Williams, Burgess, and Labouche were afterwards cast away, Teach and Penner killed and their crews taken, James Fife killed by his own men, Martel's crew destroyed, and he forced on an uninhabited island, Coughlin, Sample, and Vane hanged, Winter and Brown surrendered to the Spaniards at Cuba, and England lives now at Madagascar. In the month of May or June 1718, Captain Rogers arrived at his government with 2 of his Majesty's ships, and found several of the above said pirates there, who, upon the coming of the men of war, all surrendered to the pardon, except Charles Vane and his crew, which happened after this manner. I have before described the harbour to have 2 inlets, by means of a small island lying at the mouth of it, at one of which both the men of war entered, and left the other open, so that Vane slipped his cable, set fire to a large prize they had there, and resolutely put out, firing at the man of war as he went off. As soon as Captain Rogers had settled himself in his government, he built a fort for his defence, and garrisoned it with the people he found upon the island. The quondam pirates, to the number of 400, he formed into companies, appointed officers of those whom he most confided in, and then set about to settle a trade with the Spaniards in the Gulf of Mexico, in one of which voyages Captain Burgess above mentioned died, and Captain Hornigold, another of the famous pirates, was cast away upon rocks, a great way from land, and perished, but 5 of his men got into a canoe and were saved. Captain Rogers sent out a sloop to get provisions, and gave the command to one John Ogre, one of the pirates, who had accepted of the act of grace. In their voyage they met with 2 sloops, and John and his comrades were not yet forgetting their former business, made use of their old freedom, and took out of them in money and goods to the value of about £500. After this they steered away for Hispaniola, not being satisfied whether the governor would admit them to carry on 2 trades at once, and so thought to have bidden farewell to the Bahama Islands. But as ill luck would have it, they met with a violent tornado, wherein they lost their mast, and were drove back to one of the uninhabited Bahamas, and lost their sloop. The men got all ashore, and lived up and down in the wood for a little time, till Governor Rogers, happening to hear of their expedition and where they'd got to, sent out an armed sloop to the aforesaid island, the master of which, with good words and fair promises, got them on board, and brought them all to Providence, being 11 persons, 10 of which were tried at a court of admiralty, convicted and hanged by the others' evidence, in the sight of all their former companions and fellow thieves. The criminals would fain have spirited up the pardoned pirates, to rescue them out of the hands of the officers of justice, telling them from the gallows that they never thought to have seen the time when 10 such men as they should be tied up and hanged like dogs, and 400 of their sworn friends and companions quietly standing by to behold the spectacle. One Humphrey Morris urged the matter further than the rest, taxing them with pusillanimity and cowardice, as if it were a breach of honour in them not to rise and save them from the ignominious death they were going to suffer. But 'twas all in vain, they were now told. It was their business to turn their minds to another world, and sincerely to repent of that wickedness they had done in this. Yes, answered one of them, I do heartily repent. I repent that I had not done more mischief, and that we did not cut the throats of them that took us, and I'm extremely sorry that you ain't all hanged as well as we." "So do I," says another. "And I," says a third, and then they were all turned off without making any other dying speeches, except one Dennis McCarty, who told the people that some friends of his had often said he should die in his shoes, but he would make them liars, and so he kicked them off. And thus ended the lives with their adventures of those miserable wretches, who may serve as sad examples of the little effect mercy has upon men once abandoned to an evil course of life. Lest I be thought severe in my animadversions upon the Spanish proceedings in the West Indies, in respect to their dealings with us, I shall mention an instance or two wherein I'll be as concise as possible, and then transcribe some original letters from the governor of Jamaica and an officer of a man of war to the alcaldes of Trinidado, on the island of Cuba, with their answers, translated into English, and then proceed to the particular histories of the pirates and their crews that have made most noise in the world in our own times. About March 1722, one of our men of war trading upon the coast, viz. the Greyhound galley, Captain Walron, the said captain invited some of the merchants to dinner, who, with their attendants and friends, came on board to the number of 16 or 18 in all, and having concerted measures, about 6 or 8 dined in the cabin, and the rest were waiting on the deck. While the captain and his guests were at dinner, the boatswain pipes for the ship's company to dine. Accordingly, the men take their platters, receive their provisions, and down they go between decks, leaving only 4 or 5 hands besides the Spaniards above, who were immediately dispatched by them, and the hatches laid on the rest. Those in the cabin were as ready as their companions, for they pulled out their pistols and shot the captain, surgeon, and another, dead, and grievously wounded the lieutenant. But he, getting out of the window upon a side ladder, thereby saved his life, and so they made themselves masters of the ship in an instant. But by accidental good fortune she was recovered before she was carried off, for Captain Walron, having manned a sloop with 30 hands out of his ship's company, had sent her to windward some days before, also for trade, which the Spaniards knew very well, and just as the action was over, they saw this sloop coming down before the wind towards their ship, upon which the Spaniards took about £10,000 in specie, as I'm informed, quitted the ship, and went off in their launch unmolested. About the same time, a garde la coste of Porto Rico, commanded by one Matthew Luke, an Italian, took 4 English vessels, and murdered all the crews. He was taken by the Launceston man of war in May 1722, and brought to Jamaica, where they were all but 7 deservedly hanged. It is likely the man of war might not have meddled with her, but that she blindly laid the Launceston on board, thinking she had been a merchant ship, who thereupon catched a Tartar. Afterwards, in rummaging, there was found a cartridge of powder made up with a piece of an English journal, belonging, I believe, to the Crean Snow, and upon examination at last it was discovered that they had taken this vessel and murdered the crew, and one of the Spaniards, when he came to die, confessed that he had killed 20 English men with his own hands. End of section 1. Read by Sandra, near Montreal, 2023.